Hello, I'm Will Yeoman. I'm CEO of Writing WA, but I'm also a freelance travel journalist for the West Australian. And that's why today we're introducing two podcasts with the price of one. This is going to be appearing on Pod Street, Writing WA's official podcast, and also on West Travel Club's The Pod Well Travelled. And it's my pleasure to introduce today our guest, my colleague, Mogens Johansen. Mogens, welcome to Pod Street and The Pod Well Travelled.
Thank you very much, Will. It's a double take, but that's very nice to be part of it.
Yeah, no, it's great to talk to you again. So, look, listeners of the Pod Well Travelled might recall that you have a slightly interesting background in terms of how you arrived at becoming a travel writer. You started off in the photographic sort of section here at the West Australian and were there for a number of years. But, you know, you'd written as well. It's not to say that you've never written anything. That's ridiculous. But
yeah.
You've got to the point now where pretty much you're probably writing is the lion's share, isn't it, of what you do, and photography is probably a little less. So I'd love to know, you know, how you arrived at this point, because it's just so interesting, and you're such a great writer now. So to think that it wasn't something you did right from an early age, to reach this level is quite amazing.
No, definitely not. I mean, I arrived in Australia from Denmark about 41 years ago now.
Right.
And pretty much straight away, I after travelling around a little bit, I got a job at the West Australian as originally just working in the black and white darkroom. So that's how long ago that is. But I had a bit of a background in photography in Denmark. I did an apprenticeship at a commercial photographer and portrait studio.
Okay.
So I sort of knew, had a really good sort of grounding in photography. So once they figured out that I could actually take a couple of pictures as well, I started taking pictures for ads originally and that sort of stuff. And then it sort of morphed into news photography, and that's where I spent the bulk of my career, just as a news and sports photographer. I had a stint as the photographic chief of staff and a stint as picture editor as well, before I realised that, managing people and dealing with people wasn't really my forte. I much preferred to be on the tools. So,
yeah, of course.
I went back out shooting again, and about at that time I started doing the occasional sort of trip for Stephen Scalefield for the travel pages and writing a little bit there, but that was sort of the occasional thing. And if I had an idea, I'd go and speak to Stephen about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, go ahead and have a go at that." And he was sort of a really good guide to me initially, supporting my...
Because he's a great photographer as well as a writer, isn't he?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've got lots of common interests, but photography background Stephen has is similar to mine. So, so we had a lot in common there, but he was always a really good support and encouraging me to sort of find my own voice, I guess, and as were you when we first started working together. I think the writing thing, once you get over, in my case anyway, once I got over the sort of initial fears and have a little bit more confidence in yourself and your own voice, then it becomes a bit easier. But there's still times where I take longer to write my stories than Stephen, for example, who just pumps them out one after another.
He's a machine, isn't he?
Yeah. So it's been an interesting journey and an interesting process. And I feel, even though I got into writing late in my career, I think it's been in many ways a lot more enjoyable, because I can sort of flesh things out a little bit, and I can, in some cases you've got time to sort of think a little bit more about, how you tell the story. But I also write things like tech reviews and travel tech.
Like all the latest mobile phones and all that kind of
cameras
thing,
and that sort of stuff. And when you have to sort of explain those kind of things in a easy to read sort of language, I guess it's you have to think a little bit about it, because you don't want to get over technical about things, but on the other hand, you don't want to gloss over sort of important parts. So I mean, all these things, travel writing, tech writing, and those kind of things. It's been really interesting, and it's kept my grey matter going. So it's been good.
I mean, it's quite inspirational too, because you were probably in your mid to late 50s, I guess, when you switched careers, pretty much, and that's doesn't happen that often for people. So to get that kind of completely new opportunity reasonably late in your career is just a godsend, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it absolutely was, because some of our listeners may recall, a few, 5 or 6 years ago, or even 10 years ago, there's been, in the media, there's been lots of restructures and that, and there was here at the paper, the West Australian, there were several sort of redundancy rounds and that sort of stuff.
Right. I remember those. Yes.
And I did toy with the idea of totally switching careers and getting out of newspapers as such at that point, but as fate would have it, I got the opportunity to come on board with Stephen and the travel team, and I haven't looked back since. It's been amazing.
Well, of course. So I'm really interested to know too how you've got to the point where you know what story is best told by a photograph, what story is best told by words, and how those two actually work together in the context of an entire feature or a series of stories on one of your travel assignments, for example.
Yeah, I think we've discussed this before. I mean, I kind of... I don't know how do I explain this, but I guess if I explain how I go about a typical assignment, because I was never taught shorthand or anything like that, so I take lots of pictures. They're kind of my notes. I mean, I take notes as well, of course, but they're generally sort of just keywords, that sort of prompts my
or I guess
memory.
Place names or people, like actual names that you need to remember.
People, those kind of things. So it's a combination of the photographs and those sort of key words, I guess, that I use to sort of construct my story basically when I get back. And sometimes it's a photograph that inspires a story, or that you start that's the
starting point.
That's the starting point. And other times it's not. So it's kind of like it's a bit of a moving feast, as you'd be well aware of as well.
Look, absolutely.
I mean, we've discussed this a few times as well, and you use a similar approach, don't you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, sometimes it's a photograph that will trigger a story. At the time, it's the other way around. But also, I like you, particularly with the phone cameras, you can just take reams of photographs that you're never going to use in print, but they're there so that you can use them to remind you of something, or you can use them as it's, in a way almost you're describing the photograph, and through the photograph you're describing the actual, place you were. So you can get that real detail, can't you, which you can't get just from memory alone or even notes. No,
that's right. And, the mobile phones and all their capabilities have sort of revolutionised the way we do things, certainly in travel, I think, specifically because we can record sounds, and, you can record your own impressions as you're walking along describing a place.
You just basically dictate them, and then if you've got an app like Otter or something, you can do straight from voice to text.
Exactly. And I think, for me, they're kind of really good things.
Absolutely.
Like Otter is great if you have a long interview or something like that, and it'll transcribe most of that, pretty close to faultlessly, providing there's no sort of strong accents.
Well, indeed, but look,
all those kind of things.
It's better than just having to sort of get back and then sit there and transcribe an interview, which I used to hate doing. I mean, honestly.
And I find with just digressing a little bit. I mean. But with Otto, for example, before I would use a quote or something like that, you can see the transcript there, but I'd listen to the audio as well, and you often find that there's little sort of things that it doesn't pick up, and just for accuracy, you'd sort of double check those kind of things.
That's a great thing. You've still got both. You've always got the audio and the text, which is fantastic.
So it's certainly like. Getting involved in the writing has really opened my eyes to, got me a little bit more in tune with a lot of sort of little things that happen when you're away on an assignment, for example. I mean, in the past, if I cast my mind back to when we used to go as a team, there'd be a writer and a photographer, and you'd be out and about, and there could be, even if you worked really well together, there was sometimes some sort of communication gaps. Your impression of a place may not be the same as mine, and I think so there could sometimes be a little disconnect there. When it came to putting the final product together, but now, from my point of view, if there's a disconnect, it's my own fault.
Because you're essentially
you're in
both
charge
people.
of the whole product, and that's the way we, I guess, in the features section, but certainly in the travel section, we work like that. We do everything. It's like pictures, words, podcasts,
occasionally video, do the whole
all those kind of things. So it's a pretty broad skill set, but it's super interesting.
Yeah. So look, what has been one of the most satisfying assignments you've done that for you, the writing, it just brought out some really strong writing in you? You were really inspired.
Look, I mean, it's often places.
Yes.
You sit down. It was one thing Stephen sort of taught me initially, is just sit down and just listen to a place, and often things come out. And I find, things like that can just inspire sort of, that really descriptive writing style. And, one thing I learnt, I think, when I first started off, and I still catch myself doing it, is you can be a bit too verbose with those kind of things. You just...
it's a bit flowery. And
exactly. I tend to write it. I mean, less is sometimes more, isn't it?
Absolutely. So when you say places, you mean like cities or natural landscapes?
Well, it can be both, but I think it's harder. Not harder, but it can be like if you're in a city and you're observing daily life going by, it can be fairly straightforward to describe. But if you're in a landscape, where there's no one else around and you're just sitting there listening to the place and trying to figure out what that's special about it, I think that can be a little harder, but you just have to take your time.
Yeah. So what was the last big trip you went on? Was Cambodia, wasn't it? And places around that. So I guess that offered both experiences, didn't it? The cities and the jungles and everything as well, and the river, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a really good example. Because I mean, big cities like Phnom Penh, for example, in Cambodia is just full of life and interesting things. When if you haven't been there before, it can be a bit of a confronting place. There's all kinds of strange things happening.
Sure.
But visiting a place like Angkor Wat up near Siem Reap is quite a spiritual sort of experience. And even though in these kind of places like Angkor Wat, there can be a lot of people around, there's still opportunities to sort of find a quiet corner or quiet spot and really sort of take it all in, and
lovely.
I really enjoy those kind of things. They're to me the special parts of this job. Yeah,
and I have to admit, just trying to remember some of the stories you'd written out of that job, I did enjoy most, like the river stories, like some of the places that you encountered along the river, but also the experience of being on the river as well. Yeah,
I think I've been up to Cambodia and Vietnam a couple of times recently, but the latest one was a river cruise from Vietnam and then up to a port close to Siem Reap, along the Mekong River, and just moments sitting on the riverboat. You're sitting up there looking out over the river and watching the farmers tend their fields in the mornings, and there's a sampan with orange-clad monks, cruising up the river. It's kind of just little snippets of both pictures in your mind, and of course,
almost impressions, isn't it? It's impressionistic. These little sort of like a patchwork of images, and it builds up into a sort of a story, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And when you start off with just a couple of moments like that, then before you know it, you've built a story, and I don't know the science behind it all. It just comes out somehow.
Well, they do call it entering the flow state. It's a bit like it can happen in sports, it can happen in art, but if in writing as well, if you allow yourself to get into that, it just starts to flow. So you've got the literal flow of the river, and then you've got the flow of your words.
Yes,
in the flow state.
Right.
And so I know exactly what you mean, and it's great to have those kinds of moments that inspire that trigger that.
Yeah,
that flow, and then it's effortless, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah,
yes.
And I think early on, a few times I've spoken to Steve, and I said, "Oh, I'm just struggling to get into this," and he says, "Oh, just start writing," and it's such simple but such good advice, because you might start something and it just doesn't really work to begin with, but because you start a thought process and a
writing
process,
gets you into that space.
It gets you in there,
yes.
and then you can start messing around with perhaps the order or how you present it after.
The thing is that you've got something to play with. As before, it's that sort of procrastination, and I experience it too. You just don't want to start, because you don't know how to start.
That's right. Yeah.
And you don't realise, you forget sometimes. You just start, and it'll get you where you need to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's been like that part in particular has, for me, been the most enjoyable part of starting to write more, just seeing where it takes you, because sometimes it's quite unexpected,
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. It's literally like a journey itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't really know where you're going sometimes.
That's right, yeah.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, Mogens, look, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today on both Pod Street and the Pod Well Travelled, and hearing more about your literal and figurative journeys through writing and photography.
Well, thanks for asking me along.
No problems. You have a great day.
You too. Thanks.